Carolyn Doobie here. What's the play for today? Well, today's play is all about castles and PanPastels. Now, castles to me, well, they're just about the greatest thing in the world, and I've always wanted one. In fact, every time my kids ask me, what do you want for Christmas or your birthday or Mother's Day? My answer is always, I'd like a castle. Now, I figure since I put them through, I raised them, I put them through college, I don't think a castle's too much to ask, but it hasn't happened yet, but I'm still hanging in there. One day, I bet my kids will give me that castle. But rather than wait around for them, I decided to take matters into my own hand, and I created a stencil called Once Upon a Time that is all sorts of castle towers. Now, when I say I want a castle, really, I just really love the towers and the round rooms and all the fun windows and that kind of stuff. So that's what I've put into the stencil. And that's what you're going to see me use in this art journal page as I make a castle loaded with towers. I'm going to start by positioning the towers near the top of the page. The fact that the stencil doesn't go to the bottom, never fear, I'm going to show you how to take care of that. I'm putting a very generous amount of PanPastel just on the roofline area. Now there's a reason why I'm just putting it on the roof and why I'm putting a generous amount of the PanPastel. And that's because a baby wipe is what I'm going to use to spread it all the way down. So, and the fact that the stencil moves, not going to be an issue because you just line it right back up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a baby wipe. You want one that's moist, but you don't want it dripping and juicy. And then I'm going to use that to just rub or smear the PanPastel down the stencil. Now, I don't want to mingle my colors too much right now, so I'm going to use a baby wipe dedicated to each color. So I've had one for the pink, I have one for the orange, and one for each color. You'll understand why as we go along. Now, right now, the towers don't touch the bottom of the page, but to make that happen, all I have to do is slide the stencil down and then just continue down the straight areas. You can see how the color left on the baby wipe fills it in nicely. And I end up with a softer color down there. Now, I'm going to be building up a whole bunch of layers here, so this background layer doesn't have to be perfect in any way, shape, or form. So now I'm going to come put another tower, sort of overlapping another one, putting the color at the top just like I did last time, and dragging the color down. Now, I'm going to end up building an entire neighborhood of castle towers here because, well, if I built my own castle, it would just be tower after tower after tower. Now, if you're brand new to using PanPastels, the best way I can explain them is kind of like makeup. It's a creamy powder. It's dry, it's not wet, but it is wonderfully loaded with pigment. It's the amount of pigment, the level of color and vibrancy in it that draws me to them. Plus, there is zero time for waiting. Now, because it is a pastel, it is designed to smear and blend and do all those kinds of things, which is what I'm using to my advantage here, using the ever fancy, very precise baby wipe tool. Now, why did I just pick up my journal and tap it on the counter? Well, that was to remove some of the loose powder, the excess powder that was on the page. Because if I just brush it off with my hand, it's going to smear and I'll end up with color where I wasn't looking for it. So that's why every now and then I will tap this off if I end up with a little too much powder on there. Now it's time for the next row of towers. Notice that I've moved it down the page a little bit. So that way my roofs, my peaks, that kind of stuff is below where the back row of them is. Now the baby wipes, any baby wipe that I was using for orange, I keep using that for orange. Any one that was for green, I keep using that for green. Now at some point, because there are little bits of PanPastel here and there, and as I'm putting color on top of other colors, if my baby wipes start to get too muddy or I don't like the colors on them, the solution for that is to simply grab a fresh baby wipe. Now the stencil that I'm using, you may wonder about its size because it's not the typical 9x12 size that a large StencilGirl stencil is. And that's because the bottom part of it is cut off. It's a mask that has little itty bitty towers all over it, and it's designed to be cut off. The other thing is the towers that are inside these openings where I'm putting the PanPastels right now, those are included with it also, and we're going to be using those masks when we create the foreground. Now, up until now, it's just been kind of picking colors and putting them on there and not having to think too much, but we're about to head into the thinking portion of this page. But never fear, it's not like it's a lot of thinking or anything terribly difficult. I'm getting ready to do the foreground and I want to make sure that the colors line up well on the front. So if I'm going to put the towers here, notice how I slid it down a little bit. I'm also going to tape it because I don't want it to move for this part because I'm going to be using a lot more PanPastels than I was on any of the other towers. But I want to pick colors that will stand out and pop. So what I'm doing is laying the sponges on top of the towers where I want to put that color. And the reason why I have to do it this way is I need a visual reminder. I cannot keep this straight in my head just by magical memory. So I'm having a hard time deciding what I want to do for that center one. And so I think I'm going to sort of repeating a color. And what I'm going to do is do that one first. That way I can put the sponge back on the spot where I want it to go for the other tower, because again, I'm not going to remember which colors I decided for what. Now this time I'm not using a baby white because I want this to be the strongest, most vibrant color that I can have with the PanPastels. So that's why I'm using the sponge and I'm doing the entire thing in that PanPastel color. That'll make it a little bit brighter, stand out, pop a little bit more than the middle ground or the background. Now the thing about PanPastels is they don't have a binder in them, or basically some kind of glue or the thing that's going to hold it onto the page. And that's great if you want to smear things around. So that allows for some blending that you can't do with other products. And what that means is you're just going to need to seal them if you don't want them to blend anymore. So when I'm all done with a page, I will seal it, and I have a link down below for how I go about sealing PanPastels. Well, now what I want to do is put the windows onto each of the towers, so I'm going to match up the masks to fit each one of the PanPastel towers in the foreground. Now this is one of the handy things about getting the mask with the stencil. And by the way, I actually lined them up and matched them up to their original shapes, but could I have mixed some of the windows with some of the other towers and moved them around? Absolutely. Could I have used basically the same windows on all 5 of the towers if I wanted? Absolutely. And I'm using the white PanPastel to create the windows because that kind of matches the feeling or the vibe that I have going on with this page. Now, what about sealing this? Because if I rub my hand along this page right now, it will smear. It's PanPastels. I can make it so that it will not smear, so I could rub my hands all over it and nothing will smear. Now, I've got videos that detail the process, but for this, either using the mini misters where you make your homemade spray to seal it, or using a gel plate to seal it. For this page in particular, I think I'm going to go with the mini mister way of sealing it. Now before I get to that part though, I want to bring those back towers all the way down. Kind of a little oops there, outstanding opportunity presenting suddenly. Some of the towers are floating, so all I'm doing is grabbing some of the baby wipes and I'm just rubbing it along the bottom just to bring the color down and fill in the page completely. So the next step for me is to go and seal this, and then I've got to decide if I want to add anything more to this art journal page. I'm on the fence. It may stay just the way it is, or I may add some more to it. Now, if I add more to it, you know I'll be sharing that. And one of the best ways to be sure that you know what happens to this page is to get signed up for my newsletter over at acolorfuljourney.com. So not only will you know what the happenings are, you'll also get a free download and video that you can also download waiting for you, as well as sparks of artspiration that come in my newsletters. Thank you so much for joining me for today's play and letting me be a part of your colorful journey.